This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 182 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Make sure you're following Subway to Shea on X and Instagram. TikTok apparently is unavailable at this moment in time. So just on X and Instagram at this moment at Subway to Shea. You can follow me on X at AntRivera86 and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you prefer to listen to it, as well as if you're watching it right now on YouTube. Make sure you like this video as well. Help us get up there in the algorithm, help more people to tune in and chime in. Appreciate everyone in the chat. 18 people so far jumping in. Lulu, Aaron Manning, Rosie K, Brad, John K. Appreciate you all for tuning in. I got a special guest today. He's the co-host of the Mets Pod on SNY with Connor Rogers. And if you've checked him out, you know that he covers Mets prospects for SNY all year long. The one and only, the great Joe DeMayo. Joe, how you doing, my friend?
Doing good, Ant. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It was great to chat with you in person at the Queens Baseball Classic, at the Queens Baseball Convention, as we were part of the panel with Mark Healy, the State of the Mets, with Kelly Franco, as well as Ibby from Till Mets Do His Part. But glad to have you on here. We're going to talk prospects, but first, the Mets made a significant signing as they brought in A.J. Minter, left-handed pitcher, to come out of the bullpen. Andy Martino of SNY was on it first. 2 years, $22 million deal. Opt out after the first year, kind of worth $11 million there. Last season, 5-4 with a 2.62 ERA, had 35 strikeouts in 34 and a third innings pitched, coming off of a velocity drop and hip surgery, but those two kind of could be mutually exclusive there. Career-wise, 3.28 ERA, 422 strikeouts in 348 and two-thirds innings pitched. And in the postseason, the guy has been a gem. 2.88 ERA, 36 Ks in 25 innings pitched. Mike Mayer of Metsmerize said that only 3 lefties have accumulated at least 5 F-WAR over the last 5 seasons. That's Josh Hader, that's free agent Tanner Scott, who I was initially interested in, as well as A.J. Minter. And then Joel Sherman of the New York Post saying over the past 5 seasons, Minter's 5.1 WAR from Fangraphs tied for 11th among relievers, with new Mets starting pitcher Clay Holmes being one of them. You got Devin Williams as well, who finished second. Edwin Diaz is 4th, and there's still a couple of free agent relievers. Tanner Scott was 7th at that with a 5.7. He pitches well against righties as well, so that's a good sign. Matthew Brownstein of Metsmerize said among 130 lefty pitchers who have faced righty hitters in 250 plate appearances since 2022, Minter has the 3rd lowest ERA, 3rd lowest WOBA, 3rd highest K per walk ratio, as well as the 3rd lowest WHIP. Joe, what did you think of this signing? I think this one's a pretty good one, man.
Yeah, I mean, this is an impact setup reliever that the Mets honestly needed. And I've been saying on the Mets pod for the last couple weeks that is something that David Stearns needed to do. And, you know, Tanner Scott was a name that obviously was brought up a lot, and we know that the Mets met with Tanner Scott. But I think that's probably trending more in the 3 to 4 year type of range for him. And I don't know that David Stearns really wanted to go to that length on a reliever. And Minter is, you know, you saw him in Atlanta for the last 8 years, a legitimate setup man. So the Mets got an 8th inning guy for Edwin Diaz, and at a short-term commitment. Doesn't come without risk, as you mentioned just a second ago. He had the hip surgery, so that's something that we'll have to monitor as we head into spring training. But by all accounts, it seems like he should be good to go for there, and the Mets add a much-needed high-leverage reliever.
And I'm sure he can close in a pinch if they needed him to as well. You know, Edwin Diaz, not only does he need a setup man, but there have been certain times during the season where most of the bullpen has been unreliable to the point where to get a big at bat in the, you know, 6th in the playoffs, it was the 6th inning. You got the 7th inning as well. You need Edwin Diaz to come in here, and then you're scrambling to figure out who to close. So having a guy like A.J. Minter, who's had some closing experience, I think works out well for the Mets.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think they still need one more reliever. It doesn't necessarily need to be, and I put a list out on Twitter while I was bored at the DMV office the other day, and it doesn't have to be Kirby Yates. It doesn't have to be David Robertson, but I think they need one more reliable reliever, and then the bullpen can be, I think, in a really good spot when you have a guy like Reed Garrett, who had a good season, who's going to be a part of this bullpen. Daniel Nunez is down in Port St. Lucie throwing. He's healthy. So that's a good thing. So they need one more, I think, kind of steady seventh inning type of guy. And then I think the Mets bullpen can look pretty good heading into spring training down in Port St. Lucie.
I think with this signing, that pretty much takes them out of Tanner Scott. Now, Tanner Scott I initially wanted, but as you mentioned, the expense for Tanner Scott, I think it was like they were rounding it from 4 years to about $80 million. Getting AJ Minter, who may not be better than Tanner Scott, but those stat line, if you look on Fangraphs, those stat lines are pretty close here. So I like this line that Ibby from Till Mets Do His Part said on Twitter, saying, "Focus on production, not name value." And I think that's pretty huge here. You mentioned your list, so I'm going to bring that up because I put that in my notes. Kirby Yates, David Robertson, Carlos Estevez, Kenley Jansen, Kyle Finnegan, Ryan Stanek, and Tommy Kahnle are available. I think you can do well with signing any one of these. I think maybe Carlos Estevez and possibly Kenley Jansen, maybe a little bit more on the expensive side since they're kind of more of a closer's type. But, I think every single one of these relievers could be on this team. Which one of these, if you have to only choose one, which one are you signing and why?
So we have to take value into consideration. And I think when you look at someone like Kirby Yates, I think he's going to get really good money on a short-term deal. And honestly, he's proven he's a closer. So I wouldn't be shocked if he's a guy that ended up back in Texas, to be totally honest, on a one-year deal and just stay the Texas Rangers closer. I'm a David Robertson guy. Despite turning 40 years old, he had the best strikeout rate, said StatCast tracked him in 2017. So I think David Robertson still has some left to give. And if you want to go to like just a middle reliever type that could occasionally set up, I wanted Ryan Stanek this time last year. The Mets finally got him at the deadline, and the second half didn't go so well for him, but the postseason, the Mets don't get to where they did without Ryan Stanek as a part of the bullpen. So I'd have no opposition to bringing Stanek back into the fold in 2025.
Yeah, I like both of these guys, especially. I think like Stanek was probably the best reliever, even better than Edwin Diaz for the entire postseason. So I would love to bring him back. He proved that he could pitch in a big spot in New York, which is important. And you talk about that as well. David Robertson is another guy. He proved in 2023 when Edwin Diaz went down that he could close as well. So to have another guy like that, I think the most important thing is that you mentioned is the strikeout to walk ratio. AJ Minter too had a better strikeout to walk ratio. To you add those two veteran presences in this bullpen to hopefully help guys that have struggled. The Mets struggled a lot last season with walking batters coming out of the bullpen. So I think this is very important for them to kind of turn that narrative and turn the corner when it comes to strikeouts as well as walks.
You want guys to come in and throw strikes, and there are a few things more frustrating, and I'm a fan too. I don't just cover this thing. Few things that frustrate me more watching baseball as a fan than when relievers come in and they just cannot throw strikes. So I think Minter knows that Minter has a history of throwing strikes. Tanner Scott, everything is awesome except the throwing strikes thing. And I guess when you're looking at Scott, he doesn't give up hits or home runs. He strikes everyone out. So I guess you can live with the walks there. But generally, I think the Mets can stand to add a little more control and command, and I think Minter's the first step in that.
We're going to switch gears, talk a little bit about prospects here, and we'll get to some of your comments and your questions as well in the chat, so make sure you throw them in there for Joe. The Mets had signed Elian Peña. They were out of the Roki Sasaki. Everyone was waiting for Roki Sasaki and what he was going to do. You saw teams tell their prospects in waiting, we're going to go in a different direction just to have the opportunity to possibly sign Roki Sasaki. And to no shock of anyone, He signs with the Los Angeles Dodgers. So the Mets signed a player that they've kind of had it just wasn't a thing that just came up. They've had their eyes on Elian Peña for a very long time. 17-year-old Dominican shortstop, signed a $5 million signing bonus, the largest amount of the franchise has ever allocated to an international amateur. Outside of the Venezuelan catcher Giovanni Rodriguez, who set the previous high, which was 2.85. So $5 million. They really must believe in Elian Peña. How do you feel about Elian Peña joining the Mets and the farm system as well? And why should Mets fans be excited about this signing?
So international free agency has a wide range of outcomes. So we'll circle back in, 3 to 4 years to see really what this is about. But this is the Mets' first real dip into this type of international free agent. Their strategy has historically been sign one guy for a good bonus. Like you mentioned, Giovanni Rodriguez last year. They've had guys like Francisco Alvarez and Ronnie Mauricio, and those guys all signed in the 2 to 2.8 million dollar range. This is the Mets stepping outside the box and going top of market. If Roki Sasaki did not exist, at least as far as coming to the Major League Baseball in America this year, there'd be, I think, a lot more talk about Elian Peña because he was the top ranked international player outside of Sasaki. And Will Salmon wrote a great article at The Athletic kind of summarizing, and Peña's been a guy that's been on scouts' radar since he was 12. There were people that said he was the best 12-year-old on the planet. Take that, I guess, for whatever that's worth. But in the confines of this signing period, he's the best combination of hit tool and power in the class. He has the potential to, if he grows into his body, as you said, he's 17 years old. So there is certainly some time for him to physically mature. I think there's the chance for 25 home runs, 30 home runs in this bat. Most scouts think that he's going to be a third baseman, probably at the next level as he physically matures and moves through the minor league system. And when you sign someone like Peña, this is equivalent in a way to getting a top 5 pick in an MLB draft. I do not hear you, Ant. I don't know if I lost you or you lost me.
I had myself on mute. Always happens every time.
Yeah.
Once a show, it always happens to me. Prospect rankings, Baseball America had him at number 2. MLB Pipeline had him at number 3. And as you mentioned, if Roki Sasaki is not a part of the equation, he is probably the top heap right there. I know you didn't come out with your updated Mets prospect list just yet, and you said he would crack your top 10 on the Mets pod. But could you tell us if he's, for you, maybe top 5 or that bottom half of the top 10? Where do you don't have to tell us, because I know you want to put that in the article. Maybe you could give us a little gauge of where you might feel for him.
I thankfully have some time before I really have to make that decision. The list isn't coming out quite soon. It'll be probably sometime during spring training, and I will get information on all of the prospects as they're working in spring training. That'll kind of dictate some things. But my initial gut is he'll be in the back half of the top 10, which, for the record, I have never ranked an international free agent right after signing inside the top 15. So this is a real step up, and I can tell you that the Mets are very excited that they were able to get their hands on Elian Peña, and I'm personally very excited to see how quickly he has the potential to move through the minors. As in that article from Will, there was one scout who said he thinks Peña will debut at 20 years old, which, as we know, is an uncommon thing.
And to be fair, he's only 17, so already to be cracking that top 10 is big on its own. I know a lot of fans, when you look on social media, get upset going, another shortstop. But we all know that at the end of the day, shortstops are probably the best athletes out there. And it doesn't mean that he's going to be a shortstop when he comes. Well, obviously he can't be at this moment in time with Francisco Lindor manning shortstop. But I heard, I think from Will Salmon's article, is possibility that maybe third base is somewhere that he ends up.
Yeah, I think most people think his long-term future is third base, and we'll see how he matures. Maybe second base is in play. My retort to everybody, because I see it all on Twitter. Trust me. Every time I've tweeted about Elian Peña, I've seen a million responses of just, oh, another shortstop. As you mentioned, these are the best. When you're getting signed at this level, you are the best athlete on your team, at your training academy, wherever you are, you're the best athlete. And where do you put the best athletes? Shortstop or center field. And if you look up and down any international free agent rankings, so go to Baseball America, go to MLB Pipeline, every single one of these guys that are being signed are either shortstops, center fielders, catchers, or pitchers. That is it. There's no first baseman. There's no third baseman. There's no left fielders, right fielders. Shortstops tend to have the ability to go, on the other side of the base to second, or just a little to their right and play third base. And center fielders, of course, can translate to left or right. So I wouldn't worry too much about signing too many shortstops. The idea here between international free agency and the MLB draft, every organization's goal should be acquire the most talent that you can, the best talent that you can, because the reality is, and I've lived this business for a long time, the reality is a good percentage of them are not going to reach their ceiling. They're not going to reach their potential. Some of them won't even make the major leagues. So just get the best talent that you can, and it'll all shake itself out over time.
Elian Peña was not the only player the Mets made during the signed during the international signing period. They also, and I'm going to put it in the scroll on the bottom for everyone to see, out of the Dominican Republic infielder Guillermo Rivera, right-handed pitcher Giovanni Sanchez, infielder Ronnie Garcia, left-handed pitcher Pablo Medina, right-handed pitcher Darling Perez, as well as outfielder Yunel Cuello. And from Venezuela, they got Adrian Silva, who's a catcher, infielder Jose Padilla, infielder Yober Sempron, outfielder Alberson Blanco, right-handed pitcher Kleber Gomez, and as well as right-handed pitchers Almeida Berra and Jose Serchan as well as a catcher. Which one of these players intrigues you the most? Which one of these signings intrigues you the most?
To be totally honest, I need to get more information on these guys. These were very, I would say, lower level signings. And the reason for that, with the international signing pool, the Mets, after they signed Elian Peña for $5 million, had essentially $1 million to spend on the rest of their class. So it was spread to a lot of kind of smaller profile guys. So to give you a real answer would be disingenuous. So I will say, allow me to get information, and I will let you know. But these are certainly guys with potential. The Mets aren't signing guys just for the sake of signing them, but ultimately this class, for better or worse, is going to be about Elian Peña.
You wrote an article around the end of December, looking into 2025 and the prospects who could possibly factor into the 2025 Mets season in the big league club. You listed Drew Gilbert, Brandon Sproat, Blade Tidwell, Nolan McLean, and Jonathan Pinataro. Which one of these guys do you think will make the biggest impact? I don't know if I say first, because obviously I'll have to deal with injuries and how well some of these other players have, but which one do you think could have possibly the biggest impact here this season?
I mean, the answer is Brandon Sproat. He is my number 2 ranked prospect in the system. In other places, he's ranked first. I think you could probably do a toss-up between him and Jet Williams to who is the actual number 1 prospect in the system. But Brandon Sproat made really a meteoric rise. He was a second-round pick out of the University of Florida, and in his first full professional season, he made it all the way to AAA. And AAA was really his first speed bump that he had at the professional level. He kind of ran through Brooklyn. He ran through AA Binghamton. And, I spoke to him there, when he was with the Rumble Ponies. And one of the things that I always like to ask players when they get to AA level, that is typically the level where your first real adjustment is required. That's where, if you're a hitter, have to get used to pitchers kind of pitching backwards to you. And if you're a pitcher, you have to kind of get used to hitters aren't going to chase as often as they do in the lower minors. And I asked Brandon Sproat, what was the biggest difference that you've recognized? And he basically said, I didn't notice anything. And I guess if you're pumping up to 101 on your fastball with a sweeper, a really good changeup, and a curveball and cutter, he's kind of working on his third and fourth pitch, and I think his command certainly needs a little help at the upper levels. But Brandon Sproat is a guy that's going to start with AAA Syracuse, and I would be pretty surprised if he didn't make a debut with the Mets here in 2025, and it has the potential to be maybe by Memorial Day. I'm thinking along the lines kind of maybe the same trajectory that Christian Scott had. I think he ended up debuting at the beginning of June, something like that. Like I could see Sproat, a guy who after getting drafted was talked about as almost like a project where it's just like he has really good stuff, but a lot needs to be put together. And he has put in the work, and the Mets pitching development system is really coming along at the minor league level. So Sproat went from kind of a project to one of the very best pitching prospects in the sport, and a guy that I would bet would make a big impact on the Mets in 25.
You think Sproat has a better repertoire, a better chance than Christian Scott? You think he's better than Christian Scott?
I think he has bigger stuff than Christian Scott did. I think Christian Scott had more pitchability coming through, where he knows how to throw strikes, and he had to work kind of to figure out that third pitch. Sproat is bigger on the stuff, and he just got to kind of hone it all in together.
I Don't Play Around is asking thoughts on fake umpire effect on Sproat in AAA.
So AAA has been an impact on a lot of pitchers, and fake umpire is a funny way to put it, but the automatic ball strike system is definitely an impact, because at the AA level, you'll get just like a regular umpire, ball a couple inches off the plate, you'll get the call. At AAA, you're not getting that. And when they get to AAA level, they're also throwing a physical different baseball than they did in AA. So that is an adjustment as well. And I think that's why you have seen pitching stats kind of be down at the AAA level, while offensive stats have kind of spiked. But there's no question that the automatic ball strike system is something that is impacting pitching, and Sproat is certainly impacted by it.
Rosie K is asking, where would Sproat slot in this rotation?
I mean, so when we build rotations, right, and we're heading into spring training, we always talk about who's the ace, who's the number 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 if the Mets do a 6-man rotation. Once you really get into the rhythms of the season, that's really less of a thing. But I would say when he first comes up and he gets inserted into rotation, like theoretically he's on the back end. But I think as he matures, there is certainly potential for Brandon Sproat to be a number 2 type of starter at the next level.
I know Met fans get frustrated, especially the last 2 seasons, over how they have handled the rotation and in the signings, not making a big ace type deal, but growing Brandon Sproat and getting Christian Scott healthy again. You got Jonah Tong and Blade Tidwell. Goes a long way. I mean, you want to build within when it comes to pitching, because I feel like the pitching market every year is just overpriced, way too overpriced for a guy that pitches once every 5, now getting close to 6 days for only 5 innings a game. I think building within with guys like Jonah Tong, Blade Tidwell, and Brandon Sproat, I think that's a big deal for the Mets.
Starting pitching is kind of being minimized at the big league level, where these guys are not getting pushed deep in the games. The amount of guys that throw even 190 innings anymore is such a short list. Just go look that up. I forget what that number is, but it's a very short list of people that even threw 190, and that used to be almost like a norm. So the game is changing in the sense that starting pitching's impact is not felt quite as much as it used to be. But yet these prices keep going up. And I am of the belief that David Stearns, while he is here with the Mets, will almost never, potentially never, issue a long-term big money contract to a starting pitcher whose age starts with a 3. I think his limit is probably going to be 3 years. Maybe there's an exception for a 4th, but that is not the way he wants to build a rotation. And I understand why people are frustrated by that. But at the same time, I think this is a guy that really knows what he's doing, and I think deserves the benefit of the doubt, considering how 2024 kind of worked out so well for them in the rotation when the expectation was, man, just don't let the rotation tank the season, and ultimately ended up being a strength.
I don't remember at some point last year, someone had a chart of all of his rotations in Milwaukee, and to see the change on a year in, year out basis for a team that was a consistent playoff winner. I mean, just that alone, you have to have confidence in a guy who knows how to run an organization and how to put together these rotations on the fly.
Yeah, change isn't bad. I know everyone wants that stability, and it's like we don't want to be dealing with adding multiple starters every year. I don't care. I want David Stearns to build the best rotation that he can, and every general manager, president of baseball operations throughout the sport have their own philosophies on how they build a team. There's no one way to do it, and David Stearns' philosophy is no long-term big money deals to pitchers unless they are young. Let's not forget, they were willing to offer Yoshinobu Yamamoto $325 million. So he's not opposed to having a, quote, ace, but the idea is develop your own and then find the values in the market. Like a guy, Sean Manaea is a prime example of, they took a shot on him. It worked out really well. He opted out, and the Mets were able to bring him back. And I think that's important too, because you don't want to build a reputation of kind of being a car wash, right? Where, all right, you come here for a year, we'll help you get better, but you don't have a chance to really come back here. So I think that spoke to some of these pitchers coming up in the coming years. Hey, if you come here to, revitalize your career, there is an opportunity that we can keep you. And, Frankie Montas is a guy that I know a lot of people are down on. I think he's going to be perfectly fine. He might be more of a back end type of guy, but I think he should work out okay. And I am personally maybe almost on an island because I see what a lot of people say. I think Clay Holmes is going to be such a good starting pitcher, and we could clip this and we'll circle back in a few months. But I think Clay Holmes is going to work out really well.
Fangraphs agrees. I think they have him as the best starter right now with the most wins and the best ERA. So, I mean, if
David Stearns agrees. So on the Mets pod last week, I was like, I feel like I'm on an island with this Clay Holmes thing. And he's like, well, you're on an island with David Stearns, so that's probably not the worst place to be.
Absolutely not. One more question, because I know you got to get out of here, from Jeff Cohen. What metrics does the front office need to see before bringing up some pitchers in 2025?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think we scout the stat line often as fans, and I think that matters certainly. If it feels like someone is dominating a level, you want to challenge them to the next level. But I think when you're looking at these pitchers, especially at the AAA level, you want to make sure the command is in place. Not just the command throwing strikes, but the command within the confines of the strike zone. Because you can throw strikes, but if you throw bad strikes, that's going to get walloped. And we've seen Sproat run to some home run troubles at the AAA level. Blade Tidwell, another prospect in the system, ran to some home run troubles at the AAA level. So I think it's a combination of control, command, trying to reduce weak contact, trying to keep the ball off the barrel. Like, they're looking at things along those lines. And of course, if Brand Sproat is pitching to a 2.3 ERA for the first month of the season, I and many people will probably be calling for him to get the promotion to Queens.
Joe, it's always a pleasure getting to speak with you. Please let everyone know what you're working on and how to get in touch with you on social media.
Yeah, appreciate it. Like you said, great hanging out at the QBC and doing that panel together. So appreciate you having me here. If you don't follow me on Twitter, my handle is right below my chin at PSL2Flushing. You can check me out on the Mets Pod, which you could get on wherever you get your podcast, or SNY's YouTube channel if you want to see this face and a better looking face in Connor. That is on the table if you want to watch us. And all my work at SNY.TV, where I write mostly about prospects, but I do sprinkle in some stuff about the big league team. So that's pretty much it. And appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Joe DeMayo, co-host of the Mets Pod on SNY with Connor Rogers. And not only during the season, but all year long covering Mets prospects. Make sure you check it out on SNY's website. Joe, thanks again. Appreciate your time, man. And you have try to stay warm, avoid the snow as much as possible, because I know it's coming for all of us.
Oh, I'm not worried about the snow. I will be inside. I will be watching football. But as the snow is falling outside my window, I will be thinking of spring training. That is 3 weeks away till pitchers and catchers. So before you know it, we will be back watching guys in sunshine throwing and hitting baseballs.
And I know through social media, I think you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, right?
I am.
Just as myself here, hoping for a good head coach. Finally, maybe I don't know. I feel like Deion Sanders may be on the way.
I think it's going to be Kellen Moore. I feel like he's going to circle his way back, and we'll see how it all transpires. But as a Cowboys fan, it is tough to see the Washington Commanders make the NFC Championship, and I think the Eagles are going to make the NFC Championship here today. So
with our old coach, nonetheless, right?
With our old coach, with Dan Quinn in Washington, and Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator for Philly. So some tough times ahead for Dallas, and they certainly have some work to do. And I know a lot of people listening to this are New York fans or probably Giants fans, and it's a heck of a lot worse for you.
All right, Joe, thanks so much, man. You take care, brother.
You got it. Anytime. See ya.
All right, that was Joe DeMayo, co-host of the Mets Pod on SNY with Connor Rogers. Like he said, follow him on X at PSL2Flushing. Guys, before we, wrap up the show here, I know we're a half hour in. We only had a half hour with Joe, so I wanted to get as much information out of him as possible. I appreciate you guys in the comments. If I didn't get to your questions, I apologize. Always come back. I'll make sure I'll do my best. I see already the chat is lit up here, so I'm going to go through as much of the chat as possibly that I can here. I see a lot of conjecture in this chat about Pete Alonso, and I wanted to kind of stay away from Pete Alonso as much as possible throughout this show, because there's just really not much more that we could talk about at this moment in time, right? I mean, Pete and the Mets are at this, what is this? Is it injunction the proper term, or this crossroad of what are they going to do? And, Andy Martino, as well as Joel Sherman and John Heyman, had all posted that the Mets are kind of, pivoting. To me, I don't know. I still feel like they are going to sign him. I feel like they'll meet at the middle. The years will probably still be 3 years, and maybe they move up to, I don't know, $80 to $85 million deal. Because what team right now is really interested in bringing in Pete? There's been no offers out there. So I don't know what it is that Pete is looking for. I feel like Scott Boras, I feel like he's let Scott Boras handle all this. And, as much as Scott Boras was able to sign Juan Soto, I feel like anyone who was his agent could have worked out that Soto type deal. These are the deals that you worry about with Scott Boras, right? The top line players, as in, a Scott as in a, I don't think he's Aaron Judge's agent, but you talk about the top line players, Aaron Judge, Mookie Betts, Juan Soto. Those guys are going to get deals easily. It's the kind of, mid-tier guys is where he struggles to get contracts, because he overvalues them. Look at what happened to Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery last year, even JD Martinez. Look at all those guys that had to hold out until, the beginning of the season and most of spring training. So the Mets have all the leverage in the world at this moment in time. And I would stand pat. I want to make sure I acknowledge David Smith here, because I know he's very frustrated and very upset with the whole Pete Alonso situation. And I'm going to say that I disagree with politely and, as respectful as possible, because I like David Smith and I want him to be a part of this chat, that I do disagree. I know he said somewhere that they should just give him, whatever he wants because it's, the money. But as I said this with Mark Luino, Draftneck Mark from Mets Up podcast, and as I said here before, the Mets have the leverage. How many times have the Mets have leverage in contract negotiations? It's not a lot. And the Mets have overpaid for so many players. I think this season has been very good for David Stearns, as he has not had to, outside of Juan Soto, because you got to do whatever you can to get that top echelon guy that's only 26 years old. And he would have did the same thing for Yamamoto last year. You don't have to overpay for some of these guys. And you did have to overpay for Soto because there was bidding involved with the Yankees and the Dodgers. What bidding has been involved with Pete Alonso? There hasn't been. So the Mets can sit and wait and figure this out. Maybe they come in at the last minute. Maybe a team offers him a deal and they come in and say, hey, we'll up that a little bit. Let's get this deal done. I still think a deal gets done. And I know everyone's talking about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I just can't count on that right now. I just can't. If Pete doesn't sign here, to me, the first baseman is probably Mark Vientos. I see Brett Brown in here saying, any chance we get Alex Bregman? I think there's no chance that we get Alex Bregman. He is still looking for a 6-7 year deal. Mets ain't going to give him that. They're just not. At that point, to me, you pivot and you sign Anthony Santander, who, I haven't heard any rumors about. I haven't heard anything linked to the Mets about Anthony Santander. But the fact that now he has come down on his requests of years, or maybe a short-term deal, I think that bodes well for the Mets. Looking at some more of your chat here, Green. Let me see here. Yeah, I really can't get into Vladdy right now because who knows? He may not re-sign with Toronto, or he may. Toronto may go crazy and decide, hey, you know what, let's re-sign him. We've been getting screwed on so many deals. Even Roki Sasaki decided to go to the Dodgers, which we all knew. But them throwing a bone and having Toronto be that final team outside of the Dodgers, I thought was a little bit crazy. So I don't see, outside of maybe Toronto, signing Pete Alonso. I don't know. I don't think Vladdy gets traded at the beginning of the season. I'd be shocked. And would you want to trade your prospects right now for Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? I just don't know. Especially, it would have to be a sign and trade type for me, kind of like what they did with Francisco Lindor. David Smith saying, Pete is only 30 years old. What is wrong with 5 years? I have no problem. I've said it in the past. I have no problem giving Pete Alonso a 5-year deal for about 125 mil. I am one of the fans that wants to see Pete back. I know it's pretty 50-50 out there from what I've seen on social media. 50% want Pete back, 50% don't want Pete back, especially with how these negotiations went. But let's be fair here, right? Pete got offered 7 years, $158 million deal. He turned that down. He then got offered, what was it, between 68 and 70 mil? Turned that down. And I know people are going to say, hey, that's a low ball offer from the Mets. But Christian Walker, who had a higher WAR and played better last season and has been more consistent and plays a Gold Glove first base, got 3 years, 60 mil. So right off the bat, Pete Alonso would have been paid more than what the top free agent first baseman got in this year's offseason free agency. So I don't think the Mets are in the wrong at all here. At all. And I don't blame Pete for going out and getting his money and trying to get his money. For turning down, I don't blame Pete for this stuff. He doesn't get blamed either. Scott Boras definitely got into his head. I blame Scott Boras for overvaluing Pete, but I don't blame Pete for giving the chance and the opportunity to get more money as a prolific power hitter. He has every right to do so. But with that comes a gamble. He gambled and he lost. So that's where I think the situation is at. There's no blame on Pete. There's no blame on the Mets. If you want to blame anyone, to me, it is Scott Boras for overvaluing Pete. That's it. That's my stance on it. Rosie K saying, I worry about the number of runs this rotation will give up and the Mets' ability to score runs to offset that, but I trust Stearns. So we were talking about offense with Draftneck Mark in the last episode on Thursday. And, I always thought that pairing Pete Alonso with Juan Soto was the best the Mets can do to kind of compete with the Dodgers offense. But if you just take Pete out of the equation and you insert Juan Soto, the Mets did have a pretty good offense last season, especially in the postseason. And now you're talking about a guy who comes with a higher WAR, higher wins above replacement, and can win you probably about 8 to 10 more games just on his bat alone. So if you throw him in the lineup with Lindor, a healthy Brandon Nimmo, you got Mark Vientos, who hopefully doesn't go into that kind of sophomoric slump, which I don't think he will. A healthy Francisco Alvarez. You got Jesse Winker back as he was re-signed. I'm sure the Mets are not done. Maybe we'll see a Jose Iglesias. Maybe Jeff McNeil gets healthy again. You got Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor coming off the bench. I think this offense is good without Alonso. It just would be, I think, a whole lot better to compete with the Dodgers if you throw that in there. And we'll see what happens with the rotation, right? We said the same thing last season when the Mets brought in Minaya and they brought in Hauser and they brought in Severino, and somehow, some way, this rotation figured itself out. And on top of that, you look at that September from the rotation. That was the best I've ever seen, right? Jose Quintana had like a .62 ERA. You got contributions from Tyler McGill, who every season gives you that 1 month, and this time it was in September, not April. David Peterson is healthy again. You heard Joe talk about Clay Holmes. He likes Clay Holmes. He thinks he's going to be a really good starter. Frankie Montas, we know what he is, and we wanted him, he's a back end of the rotation type guy. But maybe he can find that spark that helped Sean Minaya as well as Luis Severino. Griffin Canning, I don't know too much about, but it sounds like him and Paul Blackburn are going to be fighting for that last rotation spot and being a swing guy. The Mets have depth. We just got to see it work out. And I didn't even mention Kodai Senga. Kodai Senga's got to be healthy. And if he's healthy, we've already seen what he can do. George saying, good morning, LFGM. Can't wait for first pitch of the year. Me either. I mean, I'm not a big football guy. I mean, I have been a Cowboys fan for most of my life, but I have not watched football as, religiously as I used to do when I was a lot younger. D saying, Carlos Baerga reports the Mets want a decision from Pete by Monday. I would take that with a grain of salt. I don't really trust Carlos Baerga. I didn't trust him when he was on the Mets. But we'll see. Daniel Caps, and it's fitting that everything is in all caps. Dodgers can sign all these people because Ohtani defers $680 million. If he didn't defer 90% of his contract, they wouldn't keep signing. People keep forgetting this. This is true. And not only is Ohtani deferring, but there are a lot of players on this team deferring, right? Blake Snell deferred money. Who else deferred money? I think Tommy Edman deferred money. A lot of players on this team are deferring money, and I think the Mets have to start getting in on that, deferring money for players, and figure out a way to get these contracts so that the Mets could sign more. But that's why they pay David Stearns to find these value plays, right? Perfect example is the signing of AJ Minter. Tanner Scott, closer, top line reliever, right? AJ Minter is just up there with him as a top. If you're talking about a setup man, AJ Minter is right there with him. I gave you the stats earlier on in the episode, and if you haven't, go check him out. He is top reliever right next to Tanner Scott and Josh Hader as a top lefty reliever. And one thing, outside of this hip injury, which, David Peterson also went through, so they can help him figure out ways to make himself better. But AJ Minter's career, if you put it back to back with Tanner Scott, been a little bit more consistent. So I think it's a great value signing for the Mets. Now they just got to get one more reliever, whether that's David Robertson, who I thought because of age I wasn't going to be interested in. And I love David Robertson, but I think Joe, sold me on him again with the fact that the strikeout ratio to walk ratio is important, especially out of this bullpen. The Mets need it because the Mets struggle out of the bullpen, and they've walked so many batters. You saw in the postseason how many batters they were walking. Can't have that. Can't have that at all. So the Mets really need to get on figuring that whole situation out. And I think that David Stearns has done a good job of bringing in AJ Minter to help out with that. And if they could bring in David Robertson, who loves pitching in New York, and I don't think he even wanted to get traded in the first place in 2023. So let's see how this thing. I don't want to go too crazy on the roster. We didn't even get to spring training yet. Once we get to that last week of spring training, when the teams are starting to come into play and starting to get starting to come to fruition, then we can figure it out. Going through some more on this comment. Stan from Westport, a good friend to the show. Stan, I know you sent me an email. I got to get into that and read that at some point. It's been a crazy couple of weeks for me, but I will get to your email. Sure, you can email me. Anyone can email me, subwaytoshay@gmail.com. So if you got any comments or questions. But he says, Ant, love your shelves on the back wall. Awesome collection. It's a whole mix of bobbleheads and Funko Pops that are Mets related. I know I got some of my Devils stuff up there as well, as I'm a New Jersey Devils fan. Even got the bobblehead from the London game. I got a couple of posters in the back there. Nice one from Athlete Logos with Eduardo Escobar. Got a lot of good stuff. I got Lindor. I got the 86 Mets there. You can't see right there from that Once Upon a Time in Queens. Got some Piazza stuff up there. So got a lot of good stuff. And always looking to add more. So at some point, that will be done. G Money Stacks talking about Jesse Winker getting signed. We talked about that a lot on the last episode. I wanted him back here as a DH bench type of player who could spell in the outfield. Love Jesse Winker. Love the grit and the toughness that he brought to this team. I think it was very important to bring that character back in here. Something that the Mets lacked and you've heard me say this many times, something that the Mets had lacked for such a long time. And he was a part of my wish list, and I got him. And my wish list is still intact, folks. It's still intact. Still intact. The only thing I don't think we're going to get at this moment in time is a starting pitcher via trade. That might happen later on down the line, maybe during the trade deadline. But I don't think the Mets are going to get that right now. Aaron Manning, good friend to the show. Do you think we add another high-end reliever like Yates or Robertson, or do you think we go after a Stanek type instead? I wouldn't be opposed to Stanek. I think he's a high-end reliever. Maybe he's not a high expensive end reliever, but look at what Stanek did. Had a great postseason in New York on the biggest stage. I am not opposed to bringing back Ryan Stanek, but you mentioned Yates and Robertson. Those guys are good. Tommy Canley from the Yankees, he's another good reliever I would consider. Carlos Estevez and I think it was Kenley Jansen who were also on that list. Obviously, Kenley Jansen is going for the closer's record. There's probably going to be no chance that he comes here. He's probably going to be expensive. And Carlos Estevez as well, being a closer, he is probably another guy that's going to be expensive. So, we'll see what happens when it comes to that. And I hope that they do. I think they will get another reliever. I don't know who it is, but I hope that they get this situated and bring in just more arms. You just got to have more arms, right? You cannot go into an offseason with not enough depth when it comes to pitching. And the Mets are building that, and that's what David Stearns is known for. So hopefully they get that. Jose Manuel, I think he's new to the channel. Appreciate you being here. And shout out to the 197 people in the chat and in this room with me. Make sure you like the Subway to Shea YouTube page. Make sure you like this video. Share it with fellow Met fans and family and friends, and help us get out there and get more followers. We are closing in on 900 subscribers. So if you can help me get to 900 subscribers, that would be fantastic. This is what, episode 182. We are, I want to say, 18 episodes away from episode 200 of the Subway to Shea podcast. Who would have thought? Look at us. Look at us. Jose Manuel is saying, problem is Scott Boras thinks he's Perry Mason, that he can win all cases. No, brother, you have to be more flexible. Absolutely correct. The owners have figured out a way to combat Scott Boras. And that's with analytics and that Moneyball type statistics. Why are they going to pay this much money for a starting pitcher or position player when they can find value elsewhere? And that's what it's become. That's why Scott Boras' game doesn't really translate as much anymore. And like I said, Juan Soto was an easy deal to make. He had suitors. You had the Yankees who wanted to bring him back. You had the Dodgers who were in on everybody. And you had the Mets and Steve Cohen who really wanted him. So I see why that worked out the way it did. Stan from Westport saying, David said 125 mil for 5 years, which isn't too far off. 70 mil for 3 years is 23.33 mil AAV. A Pete deal needs to include incentives for Pete proves he is not diminishing like his playoffs. Yeah. You put incentives in there. You put opt-outs in there as well. And hopefully that works out for Pete and for the Mets. It has to work out on both sides. It's not mutually exclusive. So we'll see how this plans out. I like this from Carlos Ramos. Did you hear any rumors about AJ Minter? That's all I'm going to say. And that's you haven't heard any rumblings from some of the Mets signings outside of Juan Soto, which was public from the beginning. A lot of these Mets signings, and it goes back to last year, and during this entire tenure that Steve Cohen has owned this team, have really been under the radar. Really. Corey saying, I'm not saying we are going to get Bregman, but he's going to have to come down with his contract request also. Agree. And I mentioned it earlier in one of the comments from a great question from one of the chat, that the Mets are not going to do any deal with Alex Bregman for, what is he asking, 6 or 7 years? It's just not realistic. That's why these guys are out here for so long, unfortunately. George saying, thank you, Cohen, Stearns, and Mendoza. We are in very good hands. Let's go Mets always. I agree with that. Carlos Ramos saying, seems fans just refuse to accept how Stearns works and how the Mets don't leak anything. The fact you don't see rumors is a great thing. Absolutely. Aaron Manning asking, does OMG Jose come back? I don't know, honestly. I really don't. I want to say that he comes back, but again, he just added Scott Boras as his agent. The Mets have a lot of infielders right now that are coming up, right? I think if, let's say the Mets don't sign Pete Alonso, you move Mark Vientos to first, and then you probably are going with Brett Beatty at third base, or Ronnie Mauricio when he gets healthy, even Ronald, I keep saying Ronald, Luis Acuna Jr., Luis Angel Acuna Jr., or Luis Angel Acuna. The name always mixes me up. But Luis Angel Acuna at third base, then I could probably see Jose Iglesias come back. Now, I know people want him back for the vibes, and I mentioned the whole thing with Jesse Winker, but there's a possibility that he just doesn't come back, especially if they re-sign Pete. Then I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he's back with the Mets. And when you sign on with Scott Boras, he's gonna want the most money, as we mentioned before. So I just don't know. I don't know if he is going to be coming back at all. Green Machine 82 saying the Mets regime doesn't leak information, so until someone else signs Alonso, I think we're win it no matter what is reported. I agree. I am not saying that the Mets are out on Pete Alonso until I see him sign elsewhere. And there hasn't been that much talk. Yes, there's been thoughts of Toronto being in on Pete Alonso, but like, you can make that up with your own mind, right? With Vladimir Guerrero becoming a free agent, maybe makes sense to sign Pete Alonso as that backup, right? Because if this guy's going to get 400 mil or more, he's not going back to Toronto. Rosie K saying, I don't think the Mets have the prospects to get Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I may have to agree with this. There are other teams that have a lot better prospects, Boston probably being one of them, that could probably make a move for a guy like Vladdy over the Mets. That's why I just rather wait until if they're going to wait and do this and not sign Pete, then maybe during free agency, because that's when Steve Cohen comes involved and can give out that much money. Trying to see if there's anything else we can get in here before I wrap up the show. We got probably about a couple more minutes here. Great chat, everybody. I'm going through all of this. A lot of good stuff that you guys have put out there. So let's feel. Aaron Manning saying, I have a feeling Frankie Montas could have a Severino type season, both coming off down years, and will work with our pitching lab and similar stuff. I agree. He may not be a top line starter, but you could do a lot worse than Frankie Montas as your number 4, number 5. All right, guys, here we go. Stan from Rest Support also adding in on the Montas. My jury is out on Montas until he goes through Mets pitching lab. If he graduates with the improvements Peterson and Manaea demonstrated, Montas will be very good. Adds on to the comments that were just made here. Master Flip saying, do not listen to Bayeger sources. Some guys who put out Ronnie will be the third base solution and move Vientos to first base. I still think that Ronnie Mauricio just won't be ready for opening day. Maybe mid-season. Obviously, if Brett Beatty has another, struggle like he struggled for most of his career, then maybe we'll see Ronnie Mauricio halfway through if they move Mark Vientos to first. D saying Mets should improve on last year's performance. Soto is a huge improvement. Totally agree with that. Even if he is just the replacement for Pete Alonso. All right, guys, as we wrap up the show here, I just want to once again thank you all for tuning in and being a part of this. Every single one of you, from top to bottom. It's been a great show. Joe DeMayo was fantastic. You were fantastic in the chat. And you guys know that I could not do this show without each and every single one of you every day to talk with, right? I mean, just talking into the air, which is what I used to do when I was just an audio format. But I love this so much better. I love having the chat be a part of this. And like I said, if I don't get to your comments, don't get upset. Don't be mad. Especially doing this by myself, it's a lot harder to get to each and every single comment that I want to on here. Because I would need like a producer, right? Like this is a solo excursion from me doing this all by myself. But when I have a guest on, it's a little bit easier to navigate through the comments. And you guys had a lot of great comments. Shout out to Lulu in the chat. Thank you so much for being a part of the show as well. Patty in NYC, appreciate you. Always great talking with you. And, obviously meeting you at the Queens Baseball Convention and at the games. So shout out to you as well. And every single one of you in the chat. Make sure you are following the Subway to Shea podcast on X, on Instagram, and I would have said TikTok, but TikTok is not working currently. TikTok has been shut down for the moment. We'll see if it comes back. But for now, on X and Instagram at Subway to Shea, you can follow me, Anthony Rivera, on X at AntRivera86. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This episode will be up probably in about the next couple of hours if you want to listen to the audio version of it. And YouTube as well. Subscribe. I'm close to 900 subscribers. Let's get us there. Share with your Met friends. Share with your Met family. Let them know that Subway to Shea is a great podcast and it's where to be, especially on a Sunday morning, which we're going to continue to do up until the season begins. We'll probably move to Sunday night because don't want to do a podcast during a series, right? That just doesn't make any sense. So maybe we'll move to nights if it works out that way. But that wraps it up here for me on the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. And always remember, let's go Mets. Thank you, everybody.